Welcome to Baby Jail Unlocked, the podcast where we peel back the layers of very common early childhood and education practices and ask, what's really going on here? I'm your host, Dr. Chloe Keegan, and today I'm diving into a recent topic that's shaking the early childhood sector. The recent move to ban male educators from changing nappies or supporting toileting needs. Now, this has sparked a lot of controversy and frankly, a lot of fear. But I want to say very clearly, fear is not policy. Banning men from core aspects of care isn't a solution, it's a distraction. And worse, it's a sexist response to very real problems. So there's a lot to uncover in this episode, so we got to get straight into it. An earlier setting called Inspire Early Learning has sparked international outrage and concern after issuing a blanket ban on male educators changing nappies or being involved in toileting duties across all of their 16 centres in Victoria, Australia. Now, this reaction, while likely rooted in fear and an attempt to reassure parents and families, comes in the wake of a horrific case where a childcare worker called Joshua Dale Brown was charged with more than 70 sex offences after allegedly abusing 8 children under the age of 2 at the Creative Garden Early Learning Centre in Point Cook in Melbourne, Southwest. While the abuse allegations are massively devastating and demand a strong and immediate response, Inspire Early Learning's blanket ban on male educators is deeply problematic. It's a fear-driven policy, and it scapegoats men rather than addressing the real systematic failures that allow abuse to happen in the first place. So first, let's name what's happening here. This is not a safeguarding strategy. It's a sexist deflection. It shifts the focus away from real structural issues like the lack of robust vetting systems, overstretched staff, underfunded services, and inadequate oversight, and places the blame on one gender class. So framing this as a protection measure implies that men are inherently dangerous around children. That's not only grossly unfair, it's dangerous logic. Because abuse isn't about gender. Abuse is about power, secrecy, and systems that fail to detect, prevent, and respond. The man arrested in Melbourne, Joshua Dale Brown, he had a valid working with children check, the equivalent of clear Garda vetting here in Ireland. And there were no prior complaints or prior convictions, but he had worked in 20 different early years settings. So my question is, how did this even happen? And where was the systematic accountability? Instead of tackling those questions head on, we're now seeing male educators being specifically removed from intimate care roles. So let's be honest, this is not safeguarding. This is a PR response disguised as policy. And it introduces discriminatory employment practices that risk driving passionate, skilled male educators completely out of the sector altogether. It also reinforces the toxic idea that men don't belong in caregiving spaces, and even worse, that they're always potential threats. That's not just damaging to staff, it's a poor message for children growing up in an already gendered society. And for the children in those centres, does having no male caregivers involved in their intimate care actually keep them safe? Or does it just mask the real vulnerabilities in the system, like, as I've said, staff being overstretched, undertrained, unsupported, and poorly supervised? True safeguarding isn't about banning men. It's about building systems that are transparent, resourced, and well monitored. So we need better whistleblowing mechanisms, more unannounced inspections, properly trained staff who understand child protection, and leadership teams who foster a culture of safety and respect, not fear, scapegoating, sexism, or discrimination. If we're serious about protecting children, we need to stop responding with knee-jerk policies that reinforce prejudice and instead invest in solutions that actually work. When we talk about safeguarding with children, the goal is to reduce risk, increase transparency, build trust in the environment where children spend their time. And this means things like rigorous screening, but ones that actually work. And the Melbourne case shows us that having a valid working with children check or Garda vetting doesn't mean abuse can't happen. So we also have to consider then the other layer of proper supervision and staffing. So safeguarding requires enough staff on the floor so that no educator is ever alone with a child during intimate care. So this isn't about whether the educator is a man or a woman, it's about ensuring safety through numbers and visibility. And alongside that, then we need safe physical environments like open layouts, glass walls around nappy changing areas, and no blind spots. So there's this need for strong workplace cultures where all staff feel empowered to speak up and children's voices are heard and valued. But what we're seeing instead is a sexist approach. Banning men from changing nappies or toileting is essentially blaming an entire gender for the failure of the system to protect children properly. And it shifts attention away from what needs to change and instead stigmatizes male educators, many of whom are dedicated caring professionals. So this is a fear-driven reaction that ignores the reality that abuse can actually happen by anybody, regardless of their gender. Instead, what this message is saying is abuse can be perpetrated only by men and they need to be removed from early childhood services. And here's the thing, this approach also creates unequivocal workload distribution. So women end up carrying even more responsibility. This means we're going to have higher levels of staffing pressure, higher levels of burnout in the sector within a sector that's already stretched quite thin. And this idea that the sector now is going to have an unequal workload distribution where the woman caters more, again, is just going to fuel the issues that the sector are already experiencing as it is today. So my position is if safeguarding were the real priority in terms of this policy discussion, the conversation wouldn't be about banning men from changing nappies. It would begin with confronting the deep cracks within the system that allowed abuse to happen in the first place. So if policy was going to focus on solution-orientated fixtures that look at the systematic failures, then they would have been discussing the first and primary focus being chronic understaffing. So as we know, many early years settings operate with too few staff, meaning educators are rushed and stretched too thin. And when there aren't enough people on the floor, the quality of care suffers. We know this, that there's less time for careful observation, fewer opportunities for peer support and vital checks, and that means rushed care. So rushed care increases the risk that abuse or neglect won't be spotted early or potentially at all. Then we also have to look at the inadequate supervision then within these structures. So in some centres, educators, regardless of gender, are left alone with children for extended periods, sometimes during tasks like nappy changing or toileting, and without proper supervision or monitoring, the risk of inappropriate behaviour increases. But effective safeguarding requires clear, consistent supervision protocols that ensure no one is left in a vulnerable or unsupervised situation. Then we have to look at the weak or inconsistent vetting systems. So this recent case of Joshua Dale Brown, who abused these children, exposes a glaring failure in vetting and information sharing between centres and regulators. So proper background checks and ongoing monitoring must be rigorous and consistent to prevent individuals who pose a risk from moving undetected through systems. I mean, remember, this person was able to move through 20 different centres and engage in all this abuse without being detected. So the absence of such robust vetting is a critical failing. And a workplace then that silences these concerns means that even with the best systems in place, safeguarding will not occur because it cannot thrive in cultures where staff are afraid to speak up. And unfortunately, many earlier settings still struggle with environments where warning signs or red flags are ignored, dismissed, or buried within these bureaucratic processes. Staff may fear retaliation or believe raising concerns won't lead to actual change, so this culture ends up normalizing. And without this openness and accountability support, safeguarding policies are merely words on paper that allows situations like this to occur all the time. So that's what effective safeguarding demands. It demands adequate resourcing, exceptional resourcing, especially when you're talking about children and safeguarding, and a culture of accountability. So that includes all educators, regardless of gender. It means training staff to understand child protection thoroughly, implementing real-time monitoring, supporting whistleblowing more than anything, and then regularly reviewing policies through a trauma-informed, rights-based lens. Instead, look, being very, very straight here, what we're seeing here is a gendered scapegoating, where men are being blamed for the systematic failures within the earlier setting. So it's reactionary, and it's a move that's targeting male educators, not because of any individual risk that males pose, but because it's easier to appear responsive than it is to do the hard work of systematic reform. And this is going to come at a massive cost. Because make no mistake, positive male role models, they matter in early childhood. And the fact that this even needs to be said nowadays is just wild. But we are here. We are here having this discussion, still advocating for why male role models matter in early childhood. But at the end of the day, we have cases such as this, and avoiding doing the systematic work results in these stigmatized approaches that are reactionary. But what I'm here to emphasize is the male role model and the male educator are massively crucial, because not only do they challenge outdated gender norms and broaden children's social experiences, but they help all children, especially boys, see that care and empathy are human qualities and they're not gender specific ones. So in safeguarding, we cannot afford to either be reactionary and especially not discriminatory. I mean, this is sexism out and out in practice, and children deserve to be safe. And that safety should never come at the cost of fairness, inclusion, or evidence-based decision making. That's what's effective safeguarding. That's what it demands. As I said, it demands the resourcing, accountability, and training. Regardless of whether you're an early years educator or a policymaker, just as a person, please consider the impact of these bans and what is the actual messaging that it's sending out to society and the children themselves. Because I need to ask the very, very clear question, is this even protecting children, or is it protecting reputations? Is it avoiding doing the hard work on a systematic level and just trying to put a band-aid over something that isn't going to work but will cause more problems down the line? We're not addressing the actual risks. We're not looking at the resourcing shortfalls. We're avoiding all the fragmented vetting systems, and we're taking an easier route because we're shifting the blame, feeding public fear, and creating a workplace culture that excludes good people based on their gender. Because true safeguarding is not about exclusion. It's inclusion with integrity. It's about all educators, regardless of gender, working together in a properly supported, supervised, and transparent environment. That's how we truly protect children's well-being and cater to their learning on a daily basis. So while I can sit here and advocate for all the changes that need to happen on a practical level within the services, I know there are many services out there that wouldn't be in support of this kind of ban. But the concern is that a lot of practice comes from the leadership of Australia, New Zealand. So internationally, I am concerned that this is going to become a more of a trend in all other countries, including Ireland. So I want you, whether you're an early years educator, or policymaker, regulator, whoever you are, I want you to really consider the critical impact of this ban, because the urgency isn't about banning men and isolating them from the early years sector. We need to create a culture where every educator, regardless of gender, feels empowered and accountable. But most of all, we have to stop equating masculinity with risk. We need to stop assuming men are perpetrators or men are abusers. We need to start equating safety with systems that actually work, particularly vetting systems and being able to monitor those who work within centres across different regions. Because true safeguarding isn't about who changes the nappy. It's about the strength of the system behind it. And currently, ours is broken. So there's an awful lot more conversations that need to be had. And we do not need to be spending our time talking about whether banning men is ethical or unethical. It shouldn't even be in the sphere right now. But unfortunately, it is. And now we need to be an awful lot stronger in our advocacy to say why male educators matter in early childhood, because they are vital to children and they are vital for staff. Thank you so much for joining and listening to me today on what is a very important and necessary topic. Because let's be clear, protecting children is a non-negotiable, but true safeguarding doesn't come from banning men. It comes from building systems that are robust, well-resourced, and rooted in accountability, not fear. So blanketed bans do not work. They mask the real issues, and they do it at the expense of gender equality, workforce diversity, and the relationships that help children thrive. So if you're an educator, a policymaker, a parent, just ask the hard questions and challenge the easy answers, such as let's just ban male educators from the earlier sector. This needs to be challenged, and choose safeguarding strategies that actually protect, not just those that feel safe on paper or get something done now. We need to invest in long-term solutions, not reactionary approaches that will cause more harm down the line. Thank you again so much for listening. Let's please keep this conversation going, because children deserve protection that is smart and fair, not driven by discriminatory practices and sexism approaches that will actually isolate and segregate us further.